This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad that you could make it here this evening. My name is Sita Ranchad-Nilsson, and I direct Emory's Institute for Developing Nations. We are a partnership between Emory and the Carter Center, and we develop a variety of university-based programs that connect to the Carter Center's work on both the health and peace sides. I'm particularly pleased to welcome you here this evening. This is the fifth event in a series on prospects for peace in Sudan and South Sudan. And I'm especially pleased to welcome Ambassador Susan Page because her name has come up, of course, many, many times in the conversations on previous events. And I'm so grateful to her for making time in her very limited time back stateside to make a trip to Atlanta. That's really great. I'm going to defer in just a moment to my colleague, Itonde Kakoma, to make a proper introduction. I will just say a little word about the series. I think this series has really given us a very unique window into the Carter Center's work in Sudan and South Sudan. I'm sure you're all familiar that the Carter Center has been working in the region for a very long time. Most perhaps well-known is the work on guinea worm eradication. The Carter Center's democracy programs and conflict resolution programs also work in the region. And the series, I think, has taught us a lot about the daunting and complex challenges facing Sudan and South Sudan in the region. But once again, sitting with Ambassador Page today, she's had a full day of conversations at the Carter Center and in a seminar at the law school this afternoon. And those conversations also, for everybody interested in issues of self-determination and justice and human rights and development, can certainly and does take away a lot from those conversations. I don't want to say too much. I just want to share something that really struck me today in the conversations, and that was in discussing the many challenges, both past and present and future, in the region. Ambassador Page reminded us that it's been a year and a half since independence for South Sudan. And while it may seem, I know we live in an instant world where instant gratification in absolutely everything is desired, she reminded us that as we look at the process of state building and human rights and justice and development, this is a nanosecond. And it's important to keep that in mind. At this point, I would like to introduce my good colleague, Itonde Kakoma. Itonde is Assistant Director of the Conflict Resolution Program at the Carter Center, and I have asked him to say a brief word about the Carter Center's work and to offer a full and proper introduction for Ambassador Susan Page. Itonde?
Good evening. Thank you again, Sita. We have very much not only enjoyed but benefited from the collaboration with the Institute for Developing Nations, particularly as it pertains to our work in the two Sudans. So thank you again. As mentioned, my name is Itonde Kakoma. I serve as Assistant Director for Conflict Resolution. And before I say much about our work and a brief introduction to whom we all came to hear, Ambassador Page, I must at least recognize senior colleagues who are with us today from the Carter Center. Dr. John Hardman, our President and CEO at the Carter Center, Dr. John Stremlaw, our Vice President for Peace Programs. My colleague Brett Lacey in the Democracy Program manages our political observation work in the Sudan as well. Forgive me for not introducing half of the audience this evening, and I hope schedules will permit some exchange of ideas. A brief word on where we are also. The Carter Center was founded more than 30 years ago now, correct, Dr. Hardman? And its home was here in this library. President Carter and Dr. Steve Hockman, who still heads research at the center, took up space in this very library, thinking about ideas around how best to utilize the post-presidency office that we have now all come to know as extremely valuable to the contribution of waging peace and fighting disease and building hope globally. And this library was that home, that initial home. More fittingly, just behind this room, in the Shatton Gallery, there is an exhibition of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference on their specific role in the struggle for civil rights in this country, and it would be unfair to limit it to this country because it was a much larger pursuit. And in many ways, the exhibition is a very good point of departure for what I think we'll hear this evening, because in those images, we see a moment in history whereby systemic forms of violence and oppression were met, not in conclusion, but the fate of that history of violence was met by non-violence, as embodied in these images, and perhaps some of those who are in this very room with us. And that non-violent struggle was not only for this city, this country, but a reflection of the global pursuit for upholding the dignity of all humans. In many ways, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, the independence of South Sudan somehow builds off of or flows out of that pursuit of upholding the dignity of all people, irrespective of ethnicity, religion, race, etc. And, like the images we see in the gallery behind us, a history of systemic oppression, violence, and various forms of systemic abuse was met at various times by violence, yes, but met its fate, not conclusion, through a non-violent political process, namely voting on the right to self-determination. Not guns or sword leading to independence, but a peaceful political process. Whether that was the intended result of the peace process, Ambassador Page would be better suited to tell us, but it was the result. In Ambassador Page's confirmation hearing, October 2011, she pointed to some of the outstanding issues that were embedded in the very peace process that she was advising. And she stated that, and I should note in the introduction to this statement, she referred to her son and family who were present, and her son is here with us also. While the CPA timeline has ended, critical agreements must still be reached between the new country and the government of Sudan. While part of the promise of the CPA was realized by allowing the people of South Sudan to chart their own future, some of the broader goals, albeit intended for a united Sudan, should continue to apply for the new Republic of Sudan, South Sudan. Democratic governance, fair and equitable distribution of resources and revenue between the center and the peripheries, and the right of all people to participate in the running of the affairs of the country. She continues by stating that the United States has been leading the donor community in the area of democratic reform and good governance, and if confirmed, I, that is she, will continue to make these programs a priority. Indeed, she has made them a priority, and as a long-time friend and advocate, serving at a period as legal advisor to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, specifically working with General Simbeo, seconded by the US government, also serving as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau for African Affairs, also serving as Regional Director for the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. She has continued those as her priorities as US Ambassador first and current Ambassador to the world's newest republic, the Republic of South Sudan. Ambassador Page, you are most welcome here. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing your reflections on the status of the world's newest nation, 18 months on. Thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you all very much for coming this evening. I know that you all have a number of things to focus on and work on, so I really appreciate your attendance this evening. First of all, I would like to thank the Johns, the Dr. Johns, including the Dr. John Garang, who is no longer with us, but thank you very much, and also to Etonde and the Carter Center. Thank you also to Sita and colleagues at Emory University. This is really, for me, quite an honor to be here. I've never actually been invited by the Carter Center or Emory University, so I feel really honored to be here tonight. I'd also like to thank my son for allowing me to do this kind of work, because the sacrifice is largely on my family. So thank you, Marius, for allowing me to be here, and thanks for coming with me. I am not going to talk long, because I think it's really important that we have the exchange of thoughts and dialogue. But I wanted to just sort of run through a few topics, and just to give you a sense of where I'm going. I will start with the fact that independence is not a panacea. Special Envoy Princeton Lyman, who retired just a few weeks ago, this is one of the things that he said, and I think it's really true, that while the thrust for the desire for independence, for self-determination, which doesn't always have to be independence, it's quite the extreme to go towards independence, but that idea, that desire for the people of South Sudan, of Southern Sudan at the time, to have their own way of doing things that matched their aspirations has been an incredible goal and achievement. And I think in our dealings, in the US government's dealings with Southern Sudan and Sudan, that has certainly been one of the really key achievements of our assistance to Southern Sudan. The fact that it was peaceful and it was fair, people were not, the rights weren't violated. I think a lot of people were very surprised. Unfortunately, we're seeing the after effects that do demonstrate that independence alone is not a panacea. You do still need, I've forgotten all the things that I said, of course, during my hearing, but it is true. All of the things that the CPA aspired to do still apply to South Sudan, even though it's now an independent country. Internal governance issues are a struggle. The SPLM itself, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, yes, it is the head of government, the main political party, but there are others who would like to have a voice, and those voices are being largely silenced. The extraordinary convention for the SPLM was supposed to have been held in February, then in March, then sometime in April, and now big question mark about that date. We don't know when the extraordinary convention will be held. Now, the reason for the convention is not the normal things that you would have a party convention for. It's really to approve the new documents that should be the ruling documents of the party. the internal party constitution, bylaws, rules and procedures, and ethics organizations. Unfortunately, they have been unable to get to this process because there are a number of people who do not want the internal SPLM constitution to be changed. And for us, I think for the US government, certainly for the Carter Center and most people striving to help countries improve democracy, if your political parties don't have internal democracy, it's very difficult to see how they will be democratic towards the rest of the country. So this is something that is really critical to us. Unfortunately, right now, the people who want to run for the next president, who want to contest in the elections that should be held in 2015, are trying to make that known during this time right now, which is supposed to be about the internal governing documents of the party. Why this is a problem is because if you are not allowed to contest in open elections within the party, that means that they will still be appointing people to positions and appointing them to be able to select the next leaders of the SPLM. So what's happening now is that you have a number of people who have either said that they are going to contest or who have intimated that they plan to contest for the SPLM chairmanship. And like in most post-liberation countries, the person who is the overall head of the SPLM, the chairman, is generally the one who is charged with then forming the next government. Of course, they have to be elected, but with the SPLM being the most well-known political party in South Sudan, it's almost a foregone conclusion that the SPLM will win. So that's why the competition for who gets the nod is so important. On Friday, the US government released the Human Rights Report. These are annual reports that we do every year for all countries in the world, except, of course, ourselves. We don't criticize ourselves on human rights violations. We should, but we don't. But the Human Rights Report for South Sudan, which is actually the first full human rights report since they became independent, is not very pretty. There are increasing human rights violations committed by both the SPLA, the police, as well as by the intelligence services. The intelligence services do not have a legal mandate. There's no National Security Act. So any of the arrests that they do are completely illegitimate. That doesn't stop them from arresting people, from detaining people, even if it is outside of their mandate and jurisdiction. In terms of the security sector, you have a bloated SPLA, which is enormous. More than 200,000 people are in the army, and that's sort of a best guess estimate. Nearly one half of those are people who were brought into the army to buy peace. That's not necessarily a bad thing. When you have a lot of armed movements that are outside of the peace process or outside of the peace agreement, sometimes you have to make these trade-offs. The downside of that is while people have been bought off to join the SPLA, their rank has not always been matched with the level of experience that they have, so that disrupts the normal chain of command and flow. And on top of it, when you bring in people who have been fighting you, you don't necessarily have universal command and control of your army. The constitutional review process was one of the ways that we had hoped that the Southern Sudanese would be able to have a voice in the running of their affairs. They have a transitional constitution which was enacted the day of independence on July 9th of 2011, but it has gaps. And the people do know, and the leadership knows, that the transitional national constitution has gaps. So they created a constitutional review commission to be able to go out and speak to the population about what they would like to see in their national constitution, what would address partly the gaps in the Constitution, but also maybe things that are not gaps, but maybe shouldn't be there. And as one example, the current transitional Constitution allows for the president, with certain reasons, to dismiss elected governors. This power has actually now been used twice. This is a problem, not that it's in their Constitution, but many people don't feel comfortable that how can the president dismiss someone who was elected by the people? So at what level are the people playing the main role, and at what level is the executive playing the main role? There are weak institutions. Unlike most countries in Africa, when they attained independence from whoever the ruling nation was, whether it was Great Britain, France, Belgium, etc., they actually acquired institutions that had structures. They also had buildings. South Sudan didn't really attain any of that. When we were doing the negotiations, a lot of the South Sudanese kept talking about development, and they kept saying, this is not about redevelopment and reconstruction. It's about construction and development. So it's not just that things were destroyed, but it's that things were never built. So Dr. John and I were talking about this morning when you first went to southern Sudan at the time, which was part of Sudan, there were no paved roads. When I made my first trip during the negotiations, there were no paved roads. We slept in tents. If you were lucky, you got an air-conditioned tent which had a fan, which was not really air-conditioned, but blew the heat around. And you paid $200 for that tent, or somewhere above $100, somewhere between $150 or more for a tent. So there are hotels, there are restaurants, it's a booming place. When I look back at my first trip in 2002 to today, 11 years later, I can't find some of the places that I went. I don't recognize it. But at the same time, even with all of the boom that's going on in South Sudan, there are still less than 400 kilometers of paved roads. The US government built the only paved highway in all of southern Sudan, and I say southern Sudan because it didn't exist pre-independence, it didn't exist during the British colonial period, and it has only now existed since independence and since the last 1 year. And that's the Juba to Nimale Road, and that's 192 kilometers, so a little less than 200 kilometers that we paved, and about 200 kilometers that the government and other partners have managed to pave. Everything is imported. Everything. And yet, South Sudan has some of the most fertile ground in the entire world. They could truly be a breadbasket, not just to Africa, but to the rest of the world. And yet, because there is such little infrastructure, they can't get their product to market, and they can't even get it to the towns. So it manages to stay in a few areas. And also, because of the war, people have not gone back and made farming a real priority. So these are all some of the areas where we can do more. On the U.S. government side, we are focusing on the Greenbelt area, which is the Equatorias, and we are doing a lot to both teach agricultural techniques, fertilizers and seeds and better crops, but also involving women. And that's really critical, because if you have more women involved in these areas, not just farming alone, but also being able to make some money from small micro enterprises, they're doing a lot, but they don't have the resources to reinvest. And so through some of our micro enterprise programs, we're able to give these women just small startup funds that they then borrow amongst each other, and the repayment rate is almost 100% everywhere, not just in one little location, but everywhere that these SME programs are going on. They loan the money to each other. They buy a sewing machine or needles or the cloth, the fabric that they need, and they then pay it back, and the rest of their community of women can use it for the next thing. So some of them are making bread, are doing small bread projects. Some of them are making crochets and fabric, sewing. So lots of different enterprises. Reconciliation is another issue that was prominent during the peace talks, but never really got off the ground. Some of you have probably heard that there was recently a presidential decree stopping the reconciliation process that was sort of started by Vice President Riek Machar from going forward. This is both a concern because reconciliation is so critical, and yet it's also really important that they get it right, and that reconciliation, if you're going to do it, has the right people involved, and that it really is a grassroots entity and not a top-down approach. Rather than approaching the churches, the various communities, civil society from up here and saying you will participate, but rather bringing them on board from the beginning and asking, how do you see this? The church is always, the church is, and I say the church sort of universally, but the church has played a really important role during the whole years of the wars, and can continue to play a vital role along with civil society and other actors in helping to make reconciliation real and a legitimate process. Let me just briefly talk about Sudan and South Sudan relations, and then the last bit I will talk about are sort of investment opportunities. South Sudan relations are, for the first time in a long time, on the right track. As you probably saw in March, the two presidents, Bashir and Kiir, signed a matrix where they agreed on a timeline for all of the activities that they had already agreed to previously, but at least now there's a timeline that is matched with the activities that they agreed to do. That includes probably most prominently both cross-border trade, which I think for the people of both countries is more important than oil, but also the oil flow to go through Port Sudan in Sudan. These, I think, are some of the major issues, but also a demilitarized zone, being able to make sure that the parties, I'm trying to think of the word in English, recul, move back from the border lines and have their troops where they're supposed to be so that they can avoid confrontations. I don't think that they will go to war again, but the more that relations continue to remain fragile and tense, the more of a likelihood that someone will get the wrong signal and act unilaterally, maybe, and do something that will spark something more violent. Of course, you all are aware that the conflict in the two areas of southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, active war is going on right there, or active conflict. I think the only way out of that is going to be through an actual dialogue. There are real internal challenges, both within South Sudan as well as within Sudan, and those do need to be addressed through some sort of a legitimate political process. War is not going to take them to resolving those problems. Abyei has still not been resolved. The two presidents have continued to speak and to talk to each other. The African Union High-Level Implementation Panel is actively engaged in all of these conflicts and is charged with helping to facilitate the process. And there, I think you get the division between the role of a facilitator versus the role of a mediator. We can discuss that if people are interested. But the AU sees its role more as a facilitator and believes that the two presidents and their governments should step up to the plate and undertake their responsibilities as leaders. I think in a perfect world that would be the case. I'm not so sure that that alone will work, which is one of the reasons why we have been working so hard with the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel. Lastly, let me just speak briefly about some of the opportunities in South Sudan. Recently, last week, we hosted an international partners forum for South Sudan. We were quite worried about the track that South Sudan was on with the lack of oil revenue, and while they have increased by some 200% non-oil revenue in the last 1 year, it's still not enough to bridge any kind of gap the way that oil revenue, which used to make up 98% of their revenue, the 220% increase in non-oil revenue is still just, unfortunately, a drop in the bucket. So we were quite concerned, even though they have managed to stay afloat, frankly, longer than anybody expected, but nonetheless, it's still very fragile. And if they were to continue along this path without receiving the oil revenue, they're borrowing against their future. And how long can you do that? How long can you do internal borrowing from your central bank or printing money? There's a limit to that without skyrocketing inflation and other things. So we hosted a partners forum where we were really trying to think outside of the box, and not just with the traditional donors like the European Union and the United States and the United Kingdom, but with also the non-traditional donors, South Africa, Japan, China, Turkey, Kuwait, and others, to see what it is that they can also contribute, that sometimes just because we don't know that they're operating in this environment, we don't talk to them about how they plan to go forward with their own development agenda in country. So this was an opportunity for us as donors bilaterally and along with the international financial institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and the African Development Bank to try to all get onto one harmonious page of, I don't like to use that phrase because I'm a page, so it's sort of like, I don't want people jumping on my back, but, so if we could get at least together and find a way that we could mutually help each other with some creative methods of assistance, that could be really beneficial. And we were able to do that in country in South Sudan, bringing the government on board with how we intended to do that, along with all of these different non-traditional donors and traditional donors to support a new kind of funding mechanism that would be a way forward for the government to not have to use all of its revenues to support some of the areas that the donors could perhaps provide some relief from, such as education and health. So that's moving forward. In addition, on the second day, we did an investment forum, and we broke out into some of the sectors that are really key. Obviously, oil, or petroleum, natural gas, where lots of people want to make an impact, explore alternative pipelines, explore trucking, all kinds of different arrangements, but also agriculture, which we all see as really the key to South Sudan's future. And importantly, in this context, something that we had been working for several months with the government of South Sudan was the OPIC investment treaty. And we were able to sign that last Wednesday. And so OPIC is now fully open for business in South Sudan, and they launched their first project, which is to build a 4-star hotel in Juba, which may sound like, well, do we need yet another hotel? But lots and lots of business people, when they want to come into a country, they want to know that there's a decent hotel where they can get internet access, there are conference room facilities that don't cost, a fortune, and as well, of course, decent accommodation. So this is the first project that's going to go forward. But what's more important about the OPIC investment agreement is that OPIC provides political risk insurance. So along with providing loans to business people that have a U.S. content, U.S. investors involved, but they've even changed their regulations. So not only does the percentage have to be much less for a U.S. investor, but they now even accept as U.S. investors green card holders. I think that's really critical because some of the South Sudanese diaspora, some of you who are here tonight, who may or may not be citizens but who may be green card holders, would love to be involved in some of these investment opportunities, but you're afraid that you may not be able to repatriate your money. This is exactly what OPIC is there for, is to provide that kind of political risk insurance so that you have confidence in going into this market that is still new. So I think that's a really positive area. Of course, with the investment opportunities is diversification of the economy. South Sudan knows that they need to do this. They're working on it. They're working on trying to put in place their legislative framework. It's slow going. The capacity is tapped out. You have ministers who are very smart, very engaged, but they're not only ministers of their ministry, but they're also charged with the negotiations in Addis Ababa. They're also involved in the movement, in the party. So they're sort of triple booked and engaged. So it's difficult sometimes when you get down to a lower level that the directors general cannot necessarily make the decisions. They wait for the minister or maybe the undersecretary to make those final decisions about the way forward. But they're trying hard. And as Sita said, as much as we complain about the problems, they're 21 months old. If we think about as parents, some of you are probably parents or have nieces and nephews, if we thought about what our 21-month-olds were doing, they couldn't go forward into the world. So it's, in a way, although wonderful that they've achieved independence, again, it's not the end, it's the beginning. And we have to remember that, but at the same time, push them towards the objectives and the goals that they set for themselves when they were in the bush and what they were fighting for, and not to replicate the bad motives and bad political system that they had in Sudan, but rather to allow people to speak out freely, to allow people their rights, to allow them to have a say in the running of their government. These are the important things that we're trying to work on and push forward. So with that, I think I'll stop. I don't know if that was long enough or short enough.
Are you still able to hear us? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Ambassador Page, thank you for your remarks. We'll open up for conversation, and while colleagues are preparing their questions, their brief questions, allow me to also introduce two colleagues who are with us. Hugh Williams, who is the diplomat in residence at Morehouse and Spelman Colleges in Atlanta. Hugh. And former, you received one applause. This is very good. And former diplomat in residence at the Carter Center, Vince Farley. And Vince's role at the Carter Center, in various forms, included assisting or supporting the brokering of the 1995 Guinea Worm ceasefire. And that period, in many ways, South Sudan has remained a focal point for the global Guinea worm eradication effort, and currently is the focal point for the final push in that eradication. And that earlier phase of engagement on the peace side has enabled an environment whereby that is a possibility. And it's curious, in earlier conversations with Vince, that some of the issues to which you pointed on internal governance issues were very much the same at play then, if not the very same individuals involved. All that to say that the Carter Center, in its history of engagement globally, Sudan as a whole has been and remains a priority for the center and for President Carter. In that light, and while colleagues formulate their questions, could you speak to the role of non-governmental organizations in the process of state building? And not seeking flattery, because I know there is a constructive role, but I also know there is a perhaps negative role as well, particularly in a place that is very dependent upon outside resources.
Sure. I think, like you said, Itonde, there are a number of very positive aspects that non-governmental organizations play. Their role as being a voice for the voiceless, for keeping all of us honest, especially the government. Oftentimes they become the watchdog because the legislature is often so weak, and in South Sudan it is weak. Not because they always just sign off on what's put before them, because they don't, but because you have literacy rates which are so low that while you have a lot of very smart people, you don't have to be literate to be smart, but they don't necessarily take the time to think about all of the ramifications of a particular bill that's put forward, because they can't read all of the details. And they don't have a staff like we do in our Congress, where you have a staffer who's done the homework and who's briefing you on the details. They don't have that. So if they either can't take the time to do that, or don't take the time to do that, or are literally unable to do that, then they're not really fully participating in that dialogue. So NGOs can play a positive role through that aspect, and also bringing to bear their capacity, their skills. Where I find some of the challenge is that often in these kinds of environments where everybody wants to be in the world's newest country, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, sometimes there's just such overlap and duplication of efforts that everyone is talking to the exact same key people. And especially in a place where you do only have a certain cadre of people who are sort of known, doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of other people who are qualified, but it's those same people that are doing the negotiations, that are running the ministries, that are tasked and charged with all kinds of other aspects, that they tend to become overloaded. And it becomes a job for the rest of the international community to make sure that we're actually coordinating our activities and our work. Then lastly, I would say the other negative side is that although we place great importance on capacity building, oftentimes in new countries or emerging post-conflict countries, the capacity building isn't really capacity building. It's actually providing assistance to the country or to a ministry, but it's not transferring those skills to those ministers or the government officials in those ministries, because you end up becoming yet another person who can do something, and they just don't have enough people who can do the activities. So that's where I think we have to be careful sometimes, is when we call it a capacity building program, are we actually building capacity, or are we conducting the work, which is important and vital, but not necessarily transferring the skill set? So that at what point do we stop doing that? We're furthering our own work, but not necessarily furthering the interests or the skill set of the South Sudanese.
As an institution, the Carter Center observed two key post-CPA political processes. In 2010, the national elections, and
not post-CPA, because those were during the
during
CPA.
CPA. Fair enough. The legal advisor corrects me.
Sorry.
Post-signing, shall we say.
Okay.
Fair enough. The national elections and the referendum itself. And you said something, quoting now former U.S. envoy Princeton Lyman, that independence is not panacea. And at that time, now we can clearly hear that the euphoria from that period is over. and the realities of independence, of self-governance are setting in, if not already set in. Can you speak about the role of leadership and vision towards building a state?
Leadership, I think, is actually really quite critical because people do still take their lead from the leaders. President Kiir has made some very forward-leaning statements. He released a letter that was sent to, well, I shouldn't say he released it, but the letter was ultimately released to a number of ministers, current and former parliamentarians, and some business people, accusing them of having stolen a large sum of money that needed to be returned to government coffers because the reputation of South Sudan was now deteriorating because of this corruption, and listing a particular bank account in Nairobi that would recover people could return part or all of the ill-gotten resources to this bank account. Now, a number of us who have lived in the region for a long time thought, opening this bank account in Nairobi, okay, that's interesting. And then secondly, there's been no follow-up. So the letter was sent out in May, June, so we are almost exactly 1 year from that. And not one person who at least received a letter has received any sort of follow-up. So there was lots of talk at the beginning, in May, in June, in July, even in August. After that, people are like, okay, no follow-up. Now, in contrast to that, I would say there has been some progress on the Dura scandal, which many of you are aware of. This was a grain scandal Dura is sort of a cereal, really. And in 2008, a lot of contracts were given to organizations to deliver grain, this Dura, to all of the states. Most of the states never actually received any of this grain, and people pocketed the money. Some of them were fraudulent companies that literally existed on paper, never really existed. So they contacted the Star Company of the World Bank, which is the sort of stressed assets program that they conduct these sorts of forensic audits in places, and they made a lot of progress on which companies were legitimate, who deserved to have been paid or to be paid, and who did not. So they first separated the companies into white, gray, and black. So the black companies, don't you love these sort of, the context of color? But in any event, the companies that were listed as black were the ones that did not merit being paid. Whether they were paid or not, they should not have been. They either didn't exist or didn't deliver. The white companies, naturally, were in the category of they delivered and either deserved the payment that they received, or if they had not been paid, deserved to be paid because they actually delivered. And the ones in the middle in the gray category were the ones that they weren't sure yet whether they should be in the white or black category. In the last couple of weeks, they've closed that gap. The World Bank has issued their near final report, which takes out the gray category altogether. And so real progress has been made, and the Ministry of Justice and the Anti-Corruption Commission have now been charged with following up on the cases that need to go to court. But having said that, those comments, I have not yet seen a comment from the leadership, as in from the president, from even the vice president, other than from the Minister of Finance, who provided briefings to a number of us during the conference, during the forum. But So leadership matters. People do pay attention to what the leader does, which is one of the reasons why when this presidential decree was released last week, on the eve of this big international forum that we were hosting, stripping the vice president of these unspecified powers, people react and they worry. So I do think it's important, and I think people are looking for the president right now to, in fact, demonstrate his leadership and his ability to move the country in the right direction.
Let's open up for questions. I don't know if there's a microphone. Good. Ben, if you could, if there are questions in the audience, kindly be brief in your questions so as to allow others. There's a hand here, Ben, if you would. We'll take 3 at a time and then proceed. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Zainab. I have one question, but I have one history to share. I'm going to make it short, and because I want to give chance to other people. I'm from South Sudan. I'm from Wow County. Maybe you hear about what is going on in Wow. You know that well, but I'm going to say to other people that they don't know. They kill our people, young kids of 17 to 21 years in September, and they said they was going to rob the bank, and there is no money in the bank. Like you say, no money in their pocket. They bury the houses. And who killed us? It was the army of the South Sudan that we was fighting and support them. We come to United States, we go everywhere and talking about what is going in South Sudan. And in our independence, we get killed. Until right now, we have 100, I'm not for sure, in prison, but they release the others. Please, we wrote the letter, he rejected, but still we're gonna talk. I've been spoke all my life to bring this freedom in South Sudan, and I'm still talking until we get the right, who can lead us by the right way. I need all these people in prison in Wow need to be released with no questions because they don't have nothing to deal with what is going on. Why they are in prison, why they get killed, they are very innocent. They need to be released with no questions. Zakaria Rizik or Rizik Zakaria, he need to be out just like everyone that he did. Why Zakaria killed 17 people and he's still in the chair and he still say, I'm still going to put them in jail. For what? Why? What we did? Just because we say no? You can say no in South Sudan. Why? I'm sure if I'm there, I've been gone a long time ago. But I'm going to be here. Like I bring the freedom for South Sudan, I'm going to bring another freedom again for South Sudan, that people can talk. You can talk, you can say nothing in South Sudan. You can speak, you be in somewhere, they cut your neck. You know that. You know that well. I don't want to hear it. We want to be free. We want to be free people. We want to speak. We want to speak. No, you can open your mouth. You can say no. Why? Why? What kind of freedom is that? I want to know what kind of freedom in South Sudan, because now it's not clear for me. Because people get killed and they're innocent. You can say, why this government take our money? There is no street, no hospital. You kill for some stuff like that. Why? Secondly, my question to you. You was talking about the voting. And we have, I think to me, we have one party. What country that have one party in the world? And you say they are active. It's not about active, about you can open your mouth, they cut it off. Thank you.
There are multiple hands. Ben, I'm going to ask you to come on, please, and then we'll come on this side. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Pilimon Gore, and my question actually is on the relation, between South Sudan and Sudan. Actually, we have seen people doing a lot of talk and agreements, and they have not been implemented the way it is, especially at the, from the north side. Recently, I have seen so many bombardment in the borderline, like in Kir Adem and other places like in Yao. And I have not seen anything from the government side or even the UN or African Union or between these two people. So my question is, what is the government and the United Nations, African Union, including the United States, what are they actually doing to follow up what is going on, the civilian being bombed in those areas? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ben, if you would come on this side, we'll take one more. Jacob, if you could show him your hand. Yeah. And we'll come back. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm so grateful to see Ambassador Susan Page, the first ambassador of America to South Sudan. The question that I have here is going to be regarding human rights. You talked briefly about human rights. There are a lot of violations in South Sudan. What is specifically the government doing to reduce those serious human rights violations? And what role are you doing as an ambassador who is assigned to that particular country? That's number one. Number two, the purpose of the SPLM Extraordinary Convention was to discuss the SPLM manifesto, rule and regulation, as well as general guideline, and as well as the policies that will help uplift the country from the problem that they are facing right now. Okay, what reason or what is specific reason as to why because nothing has been mentioned about it. It was suggested or it was stated that it will be discussed, that we will have the convention in February. It didn't happen. That we will have it again in June, did not take place. And third, the issue of a BA. People of a BA deserve the right to have independence. They want to either to go to Sudan or come to South Sudan. So they should be given that opportunity to exercise their right like everybody else in the world. So please, if you could, what is the difficulty? What is the specific problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. So we'll take another round shortly, just so we're clear then, and I think it points back to your reference to OPIC and political risk insurance also being provided. We heard a passionate plea for freedom of speech and all forms of freedom to be granted to South Sudan and the need to explore what independence in the new independent state might look like. We heard also on or a question rather pertaining to the role of the international community on bilateral relations between the two Sudans, whereby you have agreements being made simultaneously with aggression. And what is the role of the international community in that regard? And then finally, I think the first question pointed back to the first, namely on human rights and the role of the US government in ensuring human rights within South Sudan, the timeline for the convention, and then the final status of RBA.
These are all great questions, of course.
And you have an entire week to address all of them.
In terms of WOW, WOW is a huge problem. There is limited access even to getting into WOW and being able to do investigations about what's really been going on, being able to speak to the prisoners. The prisoners have intermittently gone on hunger strikes. Governor Rizek has made a number of different declarations, including about how things are supposed to be done in WOW. Of course, for us, the United States government, we want very much for people to be able to exercise their rights. One of the things that I try to do, this will hopefully answer a little bit of both questions, is to recognize that we can't ensure anything. The South Sudanese have to want this peace and want to want to protect it. What I try to do, in part with my background as a lawyer, is to say, you know, you have a constitution. The transitional constitution has a Bill of Rights in it. The Constitution, yes, everything can always be better. And there's a process for that, whether it will take off in the way that we hope or not. But the current Bill of Rights protects people's fundamental freedoms and human rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to gather, freedom to, I mean, all of that is included right there in the Bill of Rights, in the supreme law of the land, which is the Transitional National Constitution. So what I try to do is to say, this is not some foreign intervention. This is not, you know, some creation of the evil West, you know, trying to recolonize people. This is what you yourselves have agreed to. This is what you enacted, not us. So that's one way that, at least for my part, I try to encourage, if this isn't what you agreed to, well, okay, why is it here? These are the values that they wanted to set out for themselves. And I know that there are plenty of people who do want to adhere to those standards. So I think, in part, what we try to do is help them to strengthen those legal systems that provide for those rights. I've been advocating for a long time, like since I got there, for the National Security Act. That will help them set the scene for even producing the National Security Council, which is supposed to have long been in place. But if people aren't following anything, they're allowed to just make up the rules that they want instead of having something that holds them accountable. You have a process that was done incorrectly. The two directors general of the National Security Service were appointed by the president, and under the Constitution, they are supposed to be appointed by the Minister for National Security. So already they started off in the wrong way. So these two individuals who are directors general don't feel necessarily any reason that they have to submit to the authority of the minister because they were appointed directly by the president. So one way to try to get some of this back into the right form is by rationalizing the National Security Act and passing it so that people know under what authority are we operating. So that's one. In terms of bombings and not fulfilling conditions of the peace agreement, whether it's the CPA, whether it's all the Addis Ababa agreements, we speak out all of the time. I mean, there will be public statements from the spokesperson at the State Department, the White House, the embassies, but there's only so much that those sorts of things can do. Ultimately, most of this comes back down to political will. The parties themselves have to actually have the desire and the will to implement what they've signed up to. It's a bit difficult at this point. We have so many sanctions on Sudan that there's pretty much not anything left that we can pull out of our playbook to put on top of what's already in existence. And they know that. So it doesn't leave us a whole lot of room to maneuver. We already don't have an ambassador. We already have sanctions. They can't trade. They can't get, so it makes it difficult. They hear the statements and they're like, yeah, whatever. But we continue to make them in the hopes that sometimes the shaming and the world's notice. Now, one thing that did take place, and I think is extremely significant, is UN Security Council Resolution 2046. This has been instrumental in getting the parties to the point where they are now, which is a recognition that there are all these outstanding issues that have not been followed up on, and they need to be resolved. That includes Abyei, it includes the two areas, it includes, this demilitarized zone, trade, oil, all the stuff that had been agreed to, but that had not really gone anywhere. This did put pressure on both sides because neither side wanted to have sanctions put on them by the Security Council. So this has been a motivating factor. Where I think, both in terms of ABIE and some of the other agreements, is where does the Security Council actually stand in terms of compelling adherence to what they've signed up to? And I think right now we're still in a bit of a wait and see. The African Union High-Level Implementation Panel under Thabo Mbeki has been loath to insist that direct action is taken, and at the same time, not every member on the Security Council is willing to vote in favor of the September 21st proposal by former President Mbeki on ABIE. And so there's kind of a tendency to want to give the parties more time. But this can play into the hands of one side or the other, depending, in this case, more to Sudan for ABIE, perhaps on other issues to the benefit of South Sudan. So these are some of the areas that we have to work on. What is the government doing to reduce human rights abuses? They have brought some people to trial on the military side. One thing that I think would be more helpful for them is if they were open about what they've done and publicized the cases that they have actually brought before a military tribunal or otherwise. They haven't done a lot of it. The response is often, how could our military, you are accusing our entire military of human rights violations. Don't you realize these are the same people who fought for the rights and the liberation of South Sudanese, et cetera, et cetera? Yes, that doesn't mean that they are perfect. We have our own army that is brought up on, it's not the army, it's individuals who are military people who are charged with crimes. I hate to say on a regular basis, but it happens regularly. We know that there are individuals who commit bad acts, and they have to be brought up on charges. So there's still really quite a hesitation to take responsibility for the crimes that are happening, and often the knee-jerk reaction is, it's not true. It's just not true. Our people wouldn't do that. These are the same people who fought to liberate the people from the abuses of Sudan. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of very similar abuses, when you learn from the master and you just end up replicating what you learned. Maybe not that that's what you want to do, but it's what you know. It's what you saw, and you are now in power, and you get to do the same thing to other people. Why the convention didn't take place? I think that the extraordinary convention could still occur, but I believe, and people I'm sure even in this room will have different views, but because the actual SPLM, it's not the manifesto has been approved, the rules and regulations have been approved, it's the SPLM constitution that is causing them problems, because they can't agree on the new voting mechanism to how people are going to be selected, both for the Liberation Council as well as for proper voting to determine who becomes the next chairman. So that's my view. And it doesn't help, again, this is my opinion, that you now have a Constitutional Review Commission which has now been extended for 2 years instead of sort of the 6 or 9 months that was originally proposed, which means, and the Constitutional Review Commission itself and the Parliament has said that elections will be held under the current Constitution. So there's this tension between even the SPLM Constitution and the country's Constitution, taking certain powers away from the powerful people that some people don't want to see occur. So there's real tension and there's real animosity, and I believe that this is some of the reason we're seeing the the presidential decrees coming out against Riek Machar, the vice president, and other things that are happening that look like the likelihood of a new constitution for the country will come out anytime soon because they can't regulate these issues. Finally, with respect to ABA, I think the problems are well known. I don't think anything is new. It's the same exact stuff that existed in 2004 when that protocol was signed, that happened in 2005 with the government of Sudan never really embracing what was in the protocol that they agreed to. Everything was meant to be final and binding, but they could never agree on who is a resident of ABA. And the government, which has used in particular the Missouriya to fight a lot of its battles, to be a proxy in many cases. They don't want to lose the Missouriya support and have a vote go where ABA they vote to go to the south.
We'll open up for another round of questions. We'll take 4 this time. Please be brief, as time is not on our side.
Because you can see that I'm not brief in my responses.
I did not say, no. I was not referring to this. Ben, we have a question in the front here. Please use the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you for being with us this evening. I'm a student at the School of Theology, and I'm on the Justice, Peace, and Conflict Transformation track.
Theologians speak very succinctly.
Yes. You've spoken a lot this evening about the governmental and legal structures that have been implemented for conflict transformation in South Sudan. But you also mentioned the difference between facilitation and mediation. And I was wondering if you could possibly expand on that issue, as well as the need for reconciliation in the country. And I was wondering specifically what reconciliation practices are being implemented, by whom. You mentioned churches, but I was wondering also about NGOs and government practices. And are the results being seen at the local level?
Thank you. Spoken like a true theologian. The gentleman here with the red tie.
Spoken from a theologian.
Thank you. My name is Ernest Madu. I'm from South Sudan. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to ask my question. The question I have here is the rebellion that is now in part of the Jonglei and also in Unity State. Who is fighting who and for what? That question. The tribal conflict. What did you find out from leaders of South Sudan that is the real cause of this tribal conflict? Like cattle raiding, people attacking other people and destroying property. What did you find out on that? The human violation, you stated earlier that it's not pretty. So we want to find out more about, in what actually came out. So we need to know that. And as South Sudanese here, an American citizen, and we are Sudanese, South Sudanese, what can our new country help us do to help our people? Because as you went there and you live there, it's very difficult for the people, for the masses, to get their boy heard, because the people who are running the show, they're not giving a room to just a little one that is standing behind there to be heard.
Let's give the room for the little ones that are standing behind as well. The one here and then the gentleman in the back. Please go ahead.
Good evening to everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Noah Kurmayol. I'm a former Lost Boy. I came to the United States in 2001. I would like to say thank you for coming here tonight and hear all the dispute going on in the two Sudan. I'm from Unity State, and I'm from Ruang County, where the refugees in North Sudan are living in. And in that area, the Antonov always coming and bomb those refugees. And the government of Khartoum didn't accept who that airplane belonged to. The government in South Sudan, they don't know who that Heflin belonged to. And the UN is still there, they don't know who that Heflin belonged to. The civilians are being bombed. They are not military personnel, they are civilian. They are refugees and they are being killed. That's one question. Question number 2. You can't solve the problem of your own house from the outsiders without involve the owner of the house. So what will be the voices in this conflict in both sides, the North Sudanese in America and the South Sudanese in America, or South Sudanese all over the world? Where is their voices in this conflict resolution?
Sir, if you would enable some of our other friends here. I apologize for cutting you off. The final question in the very back.
Thank you. I'd like to extend my sincerest thank you for
Use the
Ambassador
microphone. Thank you.
for coming to the City of Peace, Atlanta, and for your immense contribution to doing your best to facilitate as much as possible Africa's challenges. I say this, and then I followed up with a very fundamental question. In the last 60 years, the struggle in Africa has been for independence and liberty. The independence agenda has basically been accomplished. On the issue of liberty, the leaders with a Leninist tendency of highly centralized organizations have brought flags, but they continuously abuse their people. I speak this as an Eritrean American, and I need not say anymore. I'm sure you understand the challenge the Eritrean people are facing. So in your conversation here, I'm saying how many times do we have to learn the damage done in Zimbabwe, in Angola, in Eritrea, by liberation frontiers who led their people, but they assume the way they struggled in the battlefield is the way they should govern. I would like you to address this issue and assist this new generation on the question of liberty, what the role of diaspora should be.
Thank you.
And then I have a serious issue here that a combination of a militaristic thinking with a rich oil, the curse of the oil industry, combined in South Sudan, could be a very catastrophic political challenge.
I assure you, what you have offered is enough to entertain an entire evening. Forgive me for interrupting you because, as you know, I deeply value your opinion. I'd encourage you, if possible, to be selective in your responses and perhaps respond collectively on questions of rebellions within South Sudan, who is fighting who and for what purpose, what are the root causes of tribal conflict, which point back to this question around reconciliation-related matters, what efforts are underway, if any. I think you referred to one. With regards to the Human Rights Report, perhaps we can encourage
People to read it.
online and come to your conclusions. And then finally, this reference to Leninism and overly centralized authority, but more specifically, the problem or the challenge of transitioning from rebel movement to government.
Okay, this is a hard set. Facilitation versus mediation. I would say, for instance, on the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel, President Mbeki's approach has been one more of facilitation versus mediation. The critical difference in my mind, and I'm sure there are...
The point of comparison is with the Comprehensive Peace Agreement process.
Correct,
General
and
Assembly,
lots of other peace processes where it's not, a facilitation role is generally convening people, sending out the invitations, making sure that there's space for them to talk, negotiate, etc., but not necessarily offering concrete solutions to whatever the problems are. A mediator tends to be much more engaged, tends to offer solutions or suggestions at least to a process. I think that in countries where you have strong leaders, you maybe don't need a mediator as much as you do when the parties are a little bit more weak in terms of the strength that they have to negotiate and come up with options that are not zero-sum game. So I think in this process, the parties actually do need a real mediator, which is what we did have during the CPA negotiations led by General Simbewo. Conflict resolution on the ground, there are a lot of people who are doing a ton of things. Oftentimes these are issues that start small, where you can go into an area where there is a lot of conflict and try to address those root causes of the conflict, which not in all cases, but in a lot of cases is a lack of development. It's a lack of resolutions being followed up on. So for instance, in Jonglei, they had an all Jonglei peace conference, and they agreed on a certain set of resolutions that everybody bought into, and they signed off on them as covenants, not just as, you know, agreed way forward or conclusion, but as covenants. And the church was involved, stakeholders were involved at all levels from all of the different ethnic groups. They agreed. Some of the agreements were things like, we want our women and our children to be returned to us. Fill in the blank of which ethnic group wanted those returns. We want development. We want a road. So those are some of the ways that I think that people are complaining about. There is a massive youth bulge in South Sudan. 70% of the population in South Sudan is under 30. I don't even think there's 70% of the people in this room who are under 30 in the whole country. That's massive, huge. And many of these people are not educated. They have not had the opportunity to go to school, not for want of wanting to, but because they have other responsibilities. It could be tending the cattle. It could be making sure maybe one member of the family got education. It could be because there are no schools nearby. It could be for a ton of different reasons. So you need to provide employment for all of these youth who really are just idle. So some of the conflict resolution programs on the ground are actually trying to do that. What kinds of programs could we do? Could they learn how to do brick making? So some of them are as simple, I couldn't do brick making, but offering them an opportunity to do something where they're not idle. Their guns are awash everywhere in South Sudan. So if you offer them an opportunity not only to work, but to actually earn something, there's some benefit to doing that work over and above either being idle or raiding somebody else's cattle. So we've tried to bring together people from different ethnic groups or different communities where they can work together, they do the brick making, and then they build a community building where people can actually meet and talk. Because a lot of times they just don't even have anywhere to gather. Not that under a tree is a bad thing, but where they have a dedicated place that regardless of sun or rain, they can meet in those places. So those are some of the areas that lots of people are doing. There are others who are doing actual monitoring. You have Nonviolent Peace Force, you have the UN Peacekeeping Mission, you have a number of NGOs, dialogue between the communities, supporting the church leaders, etc. So a number of these types of things have gone on. The rebellion in Jonglei and Unity State, David Yao Yao's rebel group, it's very difficult to figure out exactly what it is that they're fighting. I have made so many trips to Jonglei State. I've spoken with the Murle, I've spoken with the Boer community, I've spoken with the Nuer community. I've gone even to the sub-county level so that I can really hear from the people. And depending on who you talk to, one thing that the Murle will say is, we want the governor gone. Everything will be solved if the governor is removed. Other communities will say things like, the Murle are all criminals. I mean, there's very negative language that really borders on the kinds of things that we most want to protect against. So there's a lot of misperceptions. If you can bring people together and they can change that view of each other because they are interacting, whether it's brick making together, whether it's sitting together in a community center, those are the sorts of things that can help. Maybe just lastly, since we don't have a lot of time, well, two last things. The oil curse, South Sudan, I think, they hope that they have learned from the shutdown of oil for February, March, April, 15 months, 16 months of the shutdown of oil without that revenue coming in. They hope that they have learned to stick to an austerity budget. They've done a pretty good job of sticking to it, but there are so many things that they could do that would demonstrate to their own people that we're not just a government that takes money and doesn't provide any services. So some of these are things like you still have a number of ministers and commissioners who actually live in hotels. Now, it would be one thing if we were still in 2005, 2006, where there really was not yet accommodation for most, even the ministers. But we're in 2013, and they all have some form of accommodation. Either they've built their own house, or the government has provided a house for them. That means that despite the austerity budget, they are still receiving their housing allowance, even though they say that they've been cut. Even if they're not receiving their housing allowance, they're living in their house, or they have people renting out the house that they've built, and the government is paying their hotel stay as well. So there are some things that are just simple, no-nonsense things that they could easily do, but they've also gotten into a bit of a habit of, well, I can't travel if I'm not in first class or business class. That would just look bad. Even though I'm saying, I don't get to travel business class. If I want to pay for it myself, I can upgrade to business class. But otherwise, you know, they're greeting me in the front and I'm continuing on back to the back in, you know, the economy class section. That's because our government
Economy comfort.
Yeah. If I'm lucky, I get, you know, Delta's now changed their rules. But if I'm lucky, I can get economy comfort. But these are things that our government, admittedly, after much time, has gone to these sorts of provisions because we're going through our own austerity measures. My salary, like all government employees, has not been increased, has not been raised for 3 years. And we're looking at another couple of years of that. They haven't really undertaken some of those serious measures that they could do. So the hope, though, is that when the oil money actually starts flowing, because even though the oil is moving and has now crossed the border into Sudan, the revenue from the oil sales is still going to take several months. And even the barrels per day is drastically reduced because the pipelines haven't been used for over a year. So hopefully they will be much more prudent with how they spend the oil revenue, and with the assistance of the international community, our desire is that we can take some of the burden away by doing things, I mean, we're doing a lot, but doing even more in a couple of critical sectors like education, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, that will mean that they don't have to expend as much money on those areas and can actually focus on service delivery. Finally, in terms of the voices of the diaspora and liberty, this type of freedom, you know, my husband says to me all the time, you know, Susan, you're working so hard to try to provide a voice and help people achieve their freedom and liberty, but you can't want it more than they want it. And I'm reminded of that over and over again, and that's where that whole political will comes into play. South Sudanese have to want it, and they have to be able to stand up for it. Your people did it during the war years, and if they're on the wrong track, people have to continue to speak out. It's one thing for me to do it, and I know that there is fear because people are being killed, people are being victimized. The threats are very real. People are getting phone calls from alleged national security people saying, if you write another article against the government, you'll receive the same as person X, or you won't live for another day. These are real, and people really have fled the country. I mean, there's a lot of fear in country right now. For most of us, this is just, how could we see South Sudan get to this point after only 21 months of independence? It's shocking. But if there's no commitment on the part of South Sudanese citizens, whether you're in the diaspora or living in South Sudan, yes, it's risky. But, you know, just like I may not agree with what you say, but I will fight to the deaths for your right to say it. And that, I think, at the end of the day, it's only going to be the South Sudanese who can make that perfect union happen.
Ambassador Page, thank you very much for this evening, sharing your... That's an extended applause.
Thank you very, very
for
much.
sharing your depth of knowledge and frankness with which you spoke.
Thank you.
Sita.
I just want to say a brief word. I never like being in this position of being at the end of the evening where neither summary nor closure seems possible. But gratitude is possible and needs to be expressed. And I want to express my gratitude both to my colleagues at the Carter Center for continuing to work with us on these series, and especially to you, Itonde, for continuing to make this happen and bringing this to the Emory community. To my colleagues and students here at Emory who have been part of these conversations for the past year. I also want to thank those of you who are here tonight. It's really gratifying to see many familiar faces. The series has reached out to universities across the city, to people who are working in non-governmental organizations who are working in the region, and most of all, to people who are from Sudan and South Sudan, who have the most personal stake and interest of all, and I'm very grateful that you continue to come out and be part of this conversation. And finally, last but certainly not least, I want to thank you, Ambassador Page, again for making the time. I know that your time that you have stateside is short and very precious, as you have family to tend to, your wonderful son, who maybe will come to Emory one day. We've started work on that. But I want you to know, to thank you. I'm very grateful for your leadership and deeply appreciate the insights you've shared with us on this visit with remarkable energy and candor. The very good part about having this partnership with the Carter Center in this series is that it will continue, and I very much hope that we will be able to get you back here, perhaps in a capacity as an Emory Eagle mom someday, but certainly as part of this series. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.